Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. The Pittsburgh Penguins, to put it blunt, have shocked the world. They've done the unthinkable. They have won 4 games in a row. And as I stated at the end of last week before Saturday's victory over the New Jersey Devils, these aren't cheap victories. You're not beating teams that are at the bottom of the barrel. The first 3 matchups were against teams that are vying for playoff positioning in the Western Conference. And then on Saturday, you beat a team that is currently sitting in the 3rd position in the Metropolitan Division, and a team that had beat you, I believe, 6 straight times at PPG Paints Arena. So there's nothing cheap about these victories. Now, this win streak is tied for the longest win streak of the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and they've gotten there in some ways that you would expect. Sidney Crosby is still lighting the world on fire. In fact, the entire first line has just ascended to another level of late, but then there's other ways that they've been able to get the job done that you didn't really expect. Tristan Jarry is obviously the headline there with his performance in his 4 games since being recalled from the AHL, but I'd like to put a little bit of focus, put a little bit of attention, give a little bit of flowers, if you will, to the Pittsburgh Penguins' new look 3rd line, specifically somebody who could have potentially served as the key to unlocking offense in the Penguins' bottom 6, and that is new Pittsburgh Penguin, Connor Dewar. Now, Dewar was acquired back at the trade deadline, initially just as a facilitation from the Pittsburgh Penguins between a trade by the Boston Bruins and the Toronto Maple Leafs. And outwardly, a lot of us on the outside looking in just looked at Connor Dewar and Connor Timmins, who also came over in that trade, and said, this is Kyle Dubas bringing guys that he knows to make sure that he doesn't have to call up these young kids if they're not ready late in the season, and point blank, to give an audition for next season. Both Dewar and Timmins are pending restricted free agents, which means the Pittsburgh Penguins have control of these players. But if it doesn't work out and it doesn't look like they're a fit in Pittsburgh, no harm, no foul. You can let them walk at the end of the season. Connor Dewar is not only making a statement to say you should keep me around, but making a statement to say you should put me in pen for next year's roster, making quite the first impression. And need I go any further than saying this? Connor Dewar has had a hand, at the very least, in getting offense out of the Noel Acciari line. Whatever line Noel Acciari has been on this season, it hasn't produced offensively. That's changed over the last week and a half. And a lot of that is due to Connor Dewar and the way that he's been able to hit the ground running with the Penguins organization. Now, we did start to see some glimpses, of offensive hockey from that line when Cody Glass was moved down just before the NHL trade deadline. When it was Glass and Lizotte and Acciari, it was more so Glass and Lizotte, but they were starting to kind of create a little bit more offense out of, at the time, the Penguins' 4th line. But they're certainly creating a lot of offense now that it is Connor Dewar, Blake Lizotte, and Noel Acciari. Not only did they account for 2 goals in Saturday's victory over the New Jersey Devils, they are outscoring their opponents 3-0 in their 30 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time together, all the while starting, I'd say the majority, but I'm not sure that's a severe enough word, 18% of their shifts in the offensive zone, which means 82% of the time they are starting their shift, at least if it's via faceoff, 200 feet away from the net. And yet they're outscoring their opponents 3-0. Those facts and figures, according to naturalstattrick.com. It's been a really solid line for the Pittsburgh Penguins. It's been a major reason why they are 4-0 in their last 4 games. Mike Sullivan, head coach of the Pittsburgh Penguins, spoke about that line post-game Saturday, answering a question from Dan Kingerski of Pittsburgh Hockey Now. Sullivan said, quote, I think they play the game the right way. There's detail associated with their game. They have structure when they don't have the puck. So they're predictable for one another, and they don't go on their own agenda. The big word there, if you've heard Mike Sullivan's talk ever, the big word there for him is structure. He wants these players, he wants these lines to play within the structure that he has created. So far, so good from Dewar, Lizotte, and Acciari as a trio. Now, this isn't anything that's going to change the future of the franchise, but it is good to see the Pittsburgh Penguins finding some answers in the bottom six, even if it's for a short period of time. Now, will they have staying power is my biggest question. Will they be able to build momentum and continue to build on the momentum that they have had over the first 30 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time that they've played? We've seen a handful of depth lines have good stretches this season, whether it is a combination of Kevin Hayes, of Phil Tomasino, of Jesse Puljujärvi, who's had good stretches from time to time, I'm trying to go back to some of the players. Anthony Beauvillier was good in the bottom six for a time, but we have not seen those lines be able to withstand the test of time, be able to go multiple months playing at that high level and maintaining a high level of play, or at the very least, a consistent level of play from their line, whether they're scoring or not. We have yet to see that third or fourth line be able to stick and be able to be reliable, where Mike Sullivan looks at it and says, all right, that's going to stay for a while. We're going to try to keep those guys together. It's been experimental for the large majority of the season in the Penguins' bottom six. So that's going to be the test now for this trio. Can they extend this early success over the remainder of the 2024-25 regular season? And if they can, it's going to go a long way towards potentially bringing Acciari back instead of trading him in the offseason. We'll have to wait and see. But I think more specifically and more importantly, it goes a long way towards what they end up doing with Connor Dewar, who is going to be a restricted free agent at the end of this year. Let's close out this episode with, as we do almost every single Monday, our Pittsburgh Penguins Power Rankings. We got the top five here. Let me know in the comment section who your top five Pittsburgh Penguins are as of this moment. At number 5, and moving down one spot from last week, mainly because of how good number 4 has been in the past week, is going to be Bryan Rust. I think he barely edges out Phil Tomasino, who was in the number 5 spot last week. I think Tomasino has been extremely good for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And as I mentioned last week, he is sometimes at his best when he's not scoring. Now, he added a couple points in the last 2 games, but even in that stretch where he wasn't scoring, I believe it was 6 straight games before the matchup against whoever they played last Thursday. I'm blanking on it. But in that stretch where he wasn't scoring, where he didn't get on the score sheet, he had been playing very well. So he's going to get an honorable mention. Bryan Rust edges him out for the number 5 spot because, I mean, the whole first line has been clicking on all cylinders. They're reaching a different level together, and I have to make sure that I keep him in there because Bryan Rust is a integral part of what they're doing at the top of the Penguins lineup. At number 4, making his debut on the Penguins Power Rankings this year, it's Tristan Jarry. Now, that's not something you want to be saying about the guy that was supposed to be the starting netminder coming into the season, that we had to wait until week 23 to give him a little bit of shine, but he certainly earned it over this past week. What a difference a consistent and solid goaltender can make for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And I'm not saying we haven't seen good goaltending at all this season. I'm saying we have yet to see consistent goaltending over a period of time. We got it for about 8 games from Alex Nedeljkovic going into the Four Nations break, and then it crashed and burned at the break. All that momentum was lost, and Nedeljkovic struggled to get his footing coming out of the Four Nations break. Tristan Jarry, since coming up from the AHL, 4-0-0 in 4 consecutive starts, allowing just 2.3 goals per game, and has a .930 save percentage. And even if you look at those goals that he has allowed, a lot of that is on defensive breakdowns. A lot of that is shots where he had no chance of stopping. He has been extremely, extremely solid for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And like I mentioned, it's the first time he's been anywhere close to these rankings because he has played so far in the opposite direction through most of the season, not just at the NHL level, but at the American Hockey League level as well. But credit where credit is due. Tristan Jarry, over the last 4 games, has been a stud. And he has stood on his head, and he is, outside of, I'd say, probably Sidney Crosby in the first line, the biggest reason the Pittsburgh Penguins have turned their fortunes over the last calendar week. At number 3, cooled off a little bit, so he's going to jump down a spot from number 2 to number 3 in this week's rankings, and that's Evgeni Malkin. Like I said, cooled off a bit from his red-hot start after he returned from injury. He had 7 points in his first 4 games, and while he has still played very well over this last stretch, he only has 3 points in the last 8, and that's while playing with line mates that are looking good, right? He's playing with Phil Tomasino, who is turning heads, and he's only had 3 points in those 8 games. Now, again, how much am I bashing Evgeni Malkin by moving him from second to third on the power rankings? Not much. But when you're playing as well as the guy that's sitting in my number 2 slot is, you have to just simply score more to keep him off your back. And that is Rickard Rakell at the number 2 spot. He is not cooling down one bit. He has points in 7 of his last 8 games played, and 6 of those points, 6 goals in those 8 games played as well. I've seen a couple people say that this season is a fluke for Rickard Rakell, and that's why they needed, above all, to trade him at the deadline. Depending upon, it doesn't matter whether you believe they should have traded him or not. This is not a fluke. Could he replicate this to this level next year? Potentially. Is it likely to happen? No, I understand that. But is he still probably going to be a 25-plus goal scorer guaranteed next year, no matter where he's playing? Yes. There's going to be people that point back to, well, look at how he performed last year. The dude came off a severe shoulder injury and was hampered the remainder of the season. Not only that, and this is a huge thing, he was playing with Evgeni Malkin or on the third line. How often, after Rickard Rakell came to the Penguins, have people been saying, put him next to Crosby and leave him next to Crosby? That is how you're going to get the best out of Rickard Rakell. Not that he's not a good player away from Sidney Crosby, but those two, not to the level of Guentzel and Crosby, but those two can make magic together. Something about their chemistry just works, and it gets the best out of Rickard Rakell. We've seen that this season, and it's not a fluke. If you're paying attention, you know that if Crosby and Rakell line up side by side next year, as much as they have this year, Rickard Rakell is going to have another very solid season. So he jumps in at number 2. And at number 1, I mean, is there anybody else that we can go to? No. It is the one, the only. I say it every single week. It's getting to be a little boring at this point, but that's what you get whenever you get the excitement of watching Sidney Crosby is a boring power rankings reveal at number 1. And that means that Sidney Crosby is going to remain at number 1. He is in another atmosphere right now. Saturday ended a stretch of 3 consecutive multi-point games for the Penguins captain. But if you look back even further, he hasn't been held off of a score sheet in multiple games in a row since January 17th. That's 2 months. And I understand there was a 10-day break for the Four Nations face-off. But Sidney Crosby, even if you include those games where he played for Team Canada, was not held off the score sheet in consecutive games. Since January 17th, Crosby has 7 multi-point performances and only 3 games in which he didn't record a single point. He's a freak show. He's closing in on Wayne Gretzky's record, and he continues to just wow and impress every singular game. So that's my top 5 for this week. Bryan Rust drops down a little bit, but sticks in the top 5 at number 5. Tristan Jarry makes his debut on this list at number 4. Evgeni Malkin cools off and jumps down a little bit to number 3. Rickard Rakell takes his slot because he just continues to score goals. And at number 1 is Sidney Crosby, who continues to maintain that he is the best player in the city of Pittsburgh, and that doesn't seem like it is going to change anytime soon. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure that you like, share, subscribe if you enjoy our content, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.